Millionaire invites mistress to dinner, pregnant wife walks in and overturns the table, leaving him humiliated. Once upon a time, Elizabeth Quinn believed her marriage to millionaire hotel magnate Adrian Quinn was the pinnacle of romantic bliss. She had the sprawling mansion in upstate New York, the luxurious penthouse in Manhattan, and a husband whose dazzling charisma could light up any room. Yet beneath the facade of elegance, sinister cracks began to appear, hinting that all was not well in paradise. When rumors of another woman crept into Elizabeth's life, she chose to ignore them until one fateful evening. Unbeknownst to Adrian, his pregnant wife marched into a private dinner he had arranged for his mistress and unleashed a firestorm of drama that left everyone stunned and humiliated. Elizabeth Summers grew up in a small, cozy neighborhood in Queens. Her parents, Margaret and David Summers, owned a modest bookstore called Summers and Stories, best known for its inviting reading nooks and artisanal coffee. Throughout her youth, Elizabeth found enchantment in the stories she read, tales of knights, princesses, and sweeping romance. Little did she know that her own life would soon come to resemble the most dramatic of novels. At the age of 23, Elizabeth met Adrian Quinn at a college fundraiser. Adrian was a young entrepreneur with a burgeoning fortune, the heir to the Quinn Hotel Group, a prestigious chain of luxury hotels spanning multiple continents. Drawn to Elizabeth's warmth and intelligence, Adrian offered to donate a hefty sum for the college arts program, all while making charming conversation that made her cheeks flush. After that night, he pursued her with a fervor that felt right out of a storybook, sending flowers to her family's bookstore, surprising her with tickets to off-Broadway shows, and even showing up on her doorstep in the pouring rain just to say, "I miss you." By the time Adrian proposed a candlelit dinner in the rooftop restaurant of his flagship Manhattan hotel, Elizabeth was convinced she had met her true prince. The wedding soon followed, a grand yet surprisingly personal ceremony in the Quinn family's ancestral estate. Marble statues, an orchestra playing Bach, a train of elegantly dressed guests, everything about that day shouted opulence and tradition. But Elizabeth insisted on small, personal touches, a reading from her favorite novel, a table filled with homemade desserts from her mother's recipe box, and a heartfelt tribute to her late grandmother, who inspired her love for literature. Adrian, for all his wealth and social standing, seemed to treasure these unique details. "It makes us different," he would say, a fond look lighting up his blue eyes. "It makes us real." And for a while, Elizabeth truly believed that despite the vast gulf between their upbringings, they shared a bond built on mutual affection and respect. After the whirlwind of the wedding, Elizabeth moved into Adrian's penthouse, overlooking Central Park. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows each morning, illuminating a life that felt magical. She volunteered at a children's reading program, satisfied that she could pursue her passions while Adrian managed his corporate responsibilities. Their nights were spent sharing takeout on the plush living room carpet, discussing future travel plans, and laughing over inside jokes. In those early days, Elizabeth convinced herself they were immune to the pitfalls of wealth and power. She saw Adrian as her knight, flawed perhaps, but faithful and steadfast. If she noticed the occasional flicker of arrogance in his demeanor, she dismissed it as mere eccentricity. Love, as the fairy tales promised, would conquer all. As time progressed, Elizabeth observed faint but disconcerting changes in Adrian's behavior. They started off subtly. He would check his phone incessantly during dinner, vanish into his study for long, hushed phone calls, and seemed distracted whenever she tried to chat about her day. Initially, she blamed it on the pressure of business. The Quinn Hotel Group had recently embarked on a significant international expansion, with Adrian at the helm of negotiations that would make or break their European ventures. But what began as understandable stress morphed into something more personal. Adrian grew irritable, snapping at Elizabeth for trivial matters like accidentally misplacing his favorite cufflinks or forgetting to remind him about a brunch appointment with his business associate, Leonard Reeves. Apologies from him became rarer, replaced by curt acknowledgements and half-hearted attempts to be affectionate. Elizabeth found herself brushing off her parents' concerns. Margaret Summers noticed a certain tension in her daughter's voice whenever Elizabeth called home. "Is everything all right, dear?" Margaret would ask. "You don't sound like yourself." Elizabeth's answers were always guarded. "Mom, I'm fine, just busy." She told herself she was simply adjusting to the complexities of being the wife of a prominent businessman. Even her close friend, Samantha Morales, who worked at the bookstore with her parents, pointed out the unease. Samantha visited the penthouse once and remarked later how Elizabeth seemed on edge. Whenever Adrian joined them, Elizabeth practically tiptoed around his moods. "He's under pressure," Elizabeth insisted. "This European deal is huge. Once it's settled, he'll be back to his normal self." Yet, the more she rationalized Adrian's aloofness, the louder that small voice in her head became, warning that something was off. She tried to approach Adrian gently. One evening after dinner, Elizabeth set aside her own restlessness to confront the matter. "I know the business deal is critical," she ventured, her tone soft but earnest. "But is there something else worrying you?" Adrian dismissed her concerns with a bland smile. "Just corporate politics," he said, eyes flicking to his phone. "Don't worry about it." Then he retreated to his study. She heard the door click shut behind him, and something in her chest tightened. That night, she lay awake in their king-size bed, staring at the dark ceiling, wondering why she felt so isolated when her husband was just down the hall. When rumors began circulating about Adrian frequenting late-night bars with business associates, Elizabeth tried not to jump to conclusions. If there was one thing she prided herself on, it was her faith in her husband. But deep inside, she couldn't shake the sense that the cracks in their relationship were widening cracks she was desperately trying to fill with denial. Months crawled by, and Elizabeth clung to hope that a positive change could reignite the love story she'd once known. Then, on a chilly autumn morning, she received unexpected news. She was pregnant. She'd suspected something was different for a few weeks: unusual fatigue, sudden queasiness at random times, and an odd, almost spiritual feeling that life was changing within her. A visit to her longtime physician, Dr. Rachel Peterson, confirmed that she was indeed about 8 weeks along. At first, Elizabeth felt an electric sense of joy. She imagined telling Adrian over a candlelit dinner or leaving a creative clue around the penthouse for him to discover. She pictured his face lighting up at the prospect of fatherhood. It was a moment she had cherished in her mind since the day they got married, a child forging an unbreakable bond between them. Yet, the moment came and went, with far less fanfare than she anticipated. She prepared a romantic dinner of roast chicken with rosemary, set the table with heirloom china, and even draped twinkling fairy lights around the dining area. Adrian arrived home 2 hours late, barely acknowledging the decor before slumping into a chair. Elizabeth mustered the courage to share her secret anyway. "Adrian, I have news," she said, heart pounding. "We're going to have a baby." He blinked, his expression blank, as if processing data rather than responding to an emotional revelation. After a protracted pause, he offered a flat, "That's unexpected." Despite a half-hearted attempt at congratulations, Elizabeth sensed an underlying tension. Instead of excitement or affection, he raised logistical questions. "Did you see a doctor? Are you certain? What's the timeline?" Deeply disappointed, Elizabeth tried to hide her hurt. She had longed for him to scoop her into an embrace or to beam with pride at the thought of fatherhood. Instead, Adrian merely muttered something about how this might affect his business schedule, left his half-eaten meal on the plate, and retreated to his study. A hush settled over the dining room, where the only light came from the flickering fairy lights Elizabeth had once believed would transform the night into a romantic memory. In the following days, Adrian remained distant. While he didn't outright reject the pregnancy, he showed little enthusiasm. Elizabeth threw herself into reading baby books and planning for the future, everything from potential names to nursery decorations. She tried to share these details with Adrian, but each new conversation felt like an imposition on his time. Late at night, when he was supposedly working, Elizabeth would quietly stand by the half-closed door to his study. She often heard hushed phone calls, laughter that felt unsettlingly flirtatious, and an occasional mention of a woman's name she couldn't quite catch. Each time her heart clenched. She couldn't shake the feeling that while she was celebrating a new life, Adrian might be drifting away into a secret one of his own. Elizabeth's suspicions grew by the day. Too many oddities occurred for her to brush them all aside as coincidences. Adrian came home at irregular hours, wore cologne so strong it suggested he was masking someone else's perfume, and offered evasive answers whenever she politely inquired about his late-night meetings. No matter how gently she broached the subject, he always snapped back, citing the demands of running a global hotel empire. Feeling isolated, Elizabeth confided in Samantha Morales. "I'm pregnant, and he doesn't seem to care," she lamented over coffee in the bookstore's staff lounge. "He's always somewhere else, whether it's physically or mentally." Samantha's brow furrowed with concern. "You have to talk to him more directly," she advised. "Maybe he's stressed, but if there is another woman, better to know than live like this." Fearing confrontation, Elizabeth tried a subtler approach, first surprise lunch visits to Adrian's office. She'd arrive with a homemade sandwich or a small container of leftovers, only to find his secretary stumbling over excuses. "Mr. Quinn stepped out suddenly," or "he's in a meeting that might go on for hours." The sympathetic glances from the staff told Elizabeth enough. They pitied her, the wife who was out of the loop. It was a quiet Tuesday evening when she finally got her first concrete lead. Adrian had forgotten his phone at home in his rush for an important conference. Elizabeth rarely snooped, but the incessant buzzing drew her attention. A name flashed repeatedly on the caller ID, Caroline Gray. Something in her gut twisted at the sight of that name, a feeling of ominous dread that she couldn't explain. After the ringing subsided, Elizabeth noticed a cluster of unread messages. She hesitated. Then, with trembling hands, she opened them. "Miss you, darling. Don't forget our plans tonight. Saw a beautiful dress today. Can't wait to show you. In private. Hope your wife isn't suspicious." Elizabeth's stomach dropped. Her eyes clouded with tears as she scrolled, each line confirming the unthinkable. There was a clear intimacy between Adrian and this Caroline Gray. Week after week of rendezvous were documented in these messages, from dinners at exclusive restaurants to late-night business trips at boutique hotels in Brooklyn. The darkest realization hit her. While she was decorating a nursery, Adrian was busy entertaining another woman. In a daze, Elizabeth set the phone down and retreated to the bedroom. A tear-soaked pillow welcomed her heartbreak that night. When Adrian finally returned, close to midnight, she pretended to be asleep, unsure whether to confront him immediately or strategize a different approach. She could feel the walls of her once treasured life closing in on her. While her baby represented hope for the future, her marriage felt like a sinking ship, a betrayal so profound that it threatened to shatter her entire world. The tension between Elizabeth and Adrian mounted in the days that followed. Her discovery of Caroline Gray's messages gnawed at her mind every waking moment. She wanted to confront Adrian, but fear of his possible reaction and the chaos it might unleash kept her silent. The stakes had never been higher. She was pregnant, vulnerable, and still clinging to a shard of hope that Adrian might come to his senses. The breaking point arrived one evening when Adrian casually announced he'd be working late again. Standing in the foyer, Elizabeth mustered her courage and said, "I found your phone messages." "I know about Caroline Gray." Her voice trembled, but her eyes were fierce. Adrian paused, coat half on, and stared at her with an indecipherable expression. "Don't start, Elizabeth," he said, exasperation coloring his tone. His lack of denial was confirmation enough. A chill crept over her, like a wave of cold realization that she'd never truly known this man. Her composure cracked. "I'm pregnant with your child," she cried, voice breaking. "And you're out, parading around with another woman?" Adrian's face hardened. He set down his coat, gesturing for her to lower her voice. "You don't understand the pressures I'm under," he hissed. "Caroline she's important to business connections. It's not serious." The dismissive tone, the total lack of remorse, triggered Elizabeth's anger in a way she hadn't felt before. She demanded that he end things immediately. She demanded loyalty, if not for her, then for the baby they had created. Adrian, however, only sneered. "Don't be naive. Marriages in the upper echelon aren't always about love. It's politics and image," he said, as though explaining a lecture on economics. Elizabeth felt her heart pounding violently, tears pooling in her eyes. "That's how you see our marriage?" she asked, voice cracking. "An arrangement?" Adrian's silence confirmed everything. Without another word, he grabbed his coat and walked out, leaving Elizabeth alone in the cavernous penthouse that now felt like a prison. She collapsed onto the sofa, sobbing into the cushion, feeling betrayal and heartbreak consume her. For the first time, she wished she had never married into wealth, never left the simple, honest world of her parents' bookstore. Over the next few days, Adrian avoided her questions and her presence. She cried herself to sleep, questioning every decision she'd made. Yet, amid the despair, her maternal instinct began to sharpen. She told herself that she had to protect her child, even if that meant standing up to Adrian and facing the possibility of walking away from the life she'd built with him. Because it was clear now, if a confrontation was needed to safeguard her unborn baby's future, she would face it head-on, no matter the emotional cost. With the shards of her shattered illusions still piercing her heart, Elizabeth decided to take control of her destiny. She couldn't watch Adrian continue his illicit affair in plain sight. If he refused to value their marriage, she would have to preserve her own dignity and that of her unborn child by confronting the situation head-on. First, she visited her parents, Margaret and David Summers. Nestled in the cozy back room of their bookstore, she poured out her story in halting sobs. Her father looked thunderstruck. Her mother, equally horrified, bristled with protective indignation. "You should never have to beg a man for loyalty," Margaret declared, hugging Elizabeth tight. Her words reaffirmed what Elizabeth already knew, that love was worthless if it came with humiliation. Samantha Morales also rallied to Elizabeth's side. She arrived at the penthouse, rolling up her sleeves as though prepared for battle. Together, they made a list of Elizabeth's options, from confronting Adrian publicly to consulting a lawyer. Samantha voiced her concern. "Look, you're pregnant. You don't want to endure a long, stressful court battle, but neither can you let him walk all over you." That was the moment Elizabeth learned from a discreet tip that Adrian had booked a private room at a new French restaurant, Le Papillon d'Or, for an upcoming evening. The reservation was suspiciously timed to coincide with one of his so-called business dinners. Caroline Gray's name was on the guest list, disguised as an associate. A singular, bold plan took shape in Elizabeth's mind. If Adrian wanted to carry on a secret rendezvous with Caroline, she would ensure it was anything but secret. Rather than quietly stepping aside, she intended to catch him in the act. No excuses or spin possible. It was a dangerous gambit, one that could spark a scandal among New York's high society circles. But Elizabeth had reached her limit. She refused to allow Adrian to humiliate her in private any longer. Once she resolved to confront him, fear and exhilaration washed over her in equal measure. She envisioned walking into that sumptuous dining room, the hush descending as she revealed the truth behind Adrian's business dinners. She worried about the effect on her reputation, but that worry paled in comparison to the sense of righteous indignation fueling her every step. She was not just a scorned wife, she was a mother-to-be who deserved respect. "Let's do this," she told Samantha, voice tinged with determination. Samantha nodded, offering her unwavering support. Their plan was set in motion. Elizabeth would arrive unannounced at Le Papillon d'Or, catch Adrian and Caroline in the midst of their deceit, and force them to reckon with their betrayal in the most public way possible. Le Papillon d'Or had rapidly become the talk of Manhattan's elite. A luminous crystal chandelier presided over the main dining room, casting a warm glow on tables draped in pristine white linens. Renowned chef Marcel Dupont's menu of haute French cuisine drew celebrities, tycoons, and politicians alike. It was precisely the kind of upscale venue Adrian Quinn favored for his business gatherings, where he could cultivate the image of a refined, successful mogul. On the night in question, Adrian arrived at the restaurant with Caroline Gray on his arm. She was an elegant, striking brunette, dressed in a sleek off-shoulder gown that left little to the imagination. They were ushered into a private dining room just off the main hall, a secluded space adorned with fresh orchids and filled with the soft strains of a live violinist. For anyone observing from a distance, the scene appeared idyllic, a handsome millionaire and a sophisticated companion enjoying a romantic evening. But unbeknownst to Adrian and Caroline, Elizabeth was already in a hired car, parked discreetly on the side of the building. Her friend Samantha waited a block away, ready to provide backup if things spiraled out of control. Elizabeth's heart thundered as she smoothed her navy blue maternity dress. She felt her baby move a gentle kick, reminding her of the high stakes at play. This wasn't just about personal pride, it was about demanding the respect and security that she and her unborn child deserved. She got out of the car, inhaled the crisp night air, and walked through the restaurant's grand entrance. Heads turned. Even in her current emotional turmoil, Elizabeth radiated a dignified aura. The maitre d', recognizing her as Mrs. Quinn, looked momentarily flustered when she calmly said she needed to be shown to her husband's private room. A flicker of worry crossed his face, but he complied, guiding her through the bustling main dining area toward the closed doors of the 6IP suite. Inside, Adrian and Caroline were mid-conversation, sipping fine wine and sampling amuse-bouches. The moment Elizabeth opened the door, the room fell silent. Caroline's eyes went wide, like a deer caught in headlights. Adrian froze, a slice of foie gras poised on his fork. The violinist faltered, missing a note as the tension in the air became palpable. "Adrian," Elizabeth said, voice trembling with anger and heartbreak. Her eyes flicked to Caroline, who was staring back, uncertain whether to maintain her composure or flee. The hush deepened, the only sound a faint clink as Adrian set down his fork. A million unspoken words surged through Elizabeth's mind. She was here to drag their deceit into the spotlight, to show Adrian and Caroline that they could no longer hide. Adrian's mouth opened, but no words emerged. The weight of his double life bore down on him, evidenced by the flush creeping up his neck. In that pregnant moment, Elizabeth knew she was past any fear or doubt. She was prepared to let the pent-up fury of betrayal sweep through the lavish room, and in that determined stance, she felt a glimmer of liberation, as though reclaiming the power that had been stolen from her since the day she discovered Caroline's texts. The seconds ticked by in agonizing slow motion. A hush had enveloped the private dining suite, the violinist now standing awkwardly in a corner, his bow lowered. Every flicker of the candlelight seemed to magnify the tension. Elizabeth drew a shaky breath. "So, this is your business dinner, Adrian?" she asked, barely containing her rage. Her voice, though soft, radiated accusation. She turned her gaze to Caroline, who shrank back under the weight of Elizabeth's glare. "And you must be Caroline Gray, the woman you've been texting every night." Caroline's face lost its color. She glanced toward Adrian, clearly expecting him to take charge of the situation. Adrian rose from his seat, attempting to project authority, but his eyes betrayed panic. "Elizabeth," he began, voice low and rushed, "you didn't have to come here. We were just what?" Elizabeth's tone was razor-sharp. "Enjoying a romantic evening while your pregnant wife is home alone?" A muted gasp escaped Caroline's lips. Even she seemed unsettled by the revelation that Elizabeth was expecting a child. Adrian took a step forward, one hand outstretched, as if to placate Elizabeth. "Listen," he insisted, "this isn't what it looks like. Caroline is a valuable business contact." At that moment, Elizabeth reached her emotional breaking point. Weeks of suspicion, heartbreak, and humiliation ignited inside her like a firestorm. "Business contact?" she repeated, her fury boiling over. She lunged forward, grabbing the edge of the elegantly set table. Fine china clinked against crystal glasses in a precarious symphony. Caroline yelped in alarm. Adrian's eyes went wide. But Elizabeth, who had once prided herself on gentle composure, reached deep into her reservoir of righteous anger. In one swift motion, she flipped the table, sending porcelain plates, half-eaten gourmet dishes, and a chilled bottle of champagne crashing to the floor. A cacophony of shattering glass and silverware filled the room. Caroline leaped backward with a startled scream, wine splashing across her designer gown. Adrian stood there, dumbfounded, as foie gras and sauce dripped onto his polished shoes. For a moment, no one moved. The stunned silence was so total, it was as if the entire restaurant had gone mute. Elizabeth's chest heaved, adrenaline coursing through her veins. Part of her couldn't believe what she'd just done. She had never been the type to unleash such theatrics. Yet, the satisfaction of publicly exposing Adrian's betrayal was undeniable. She felt a flicker of triumph amidst her heartbreak. From now on, she hissed, voice trembling, "You can explain to everyone in your precious social circle exactly why your wife caught you like this." She turned on Caroline, who stood trembling. "And you, I hope the business benefits are worth humiliating another woman, because that's the only thing you're going to be known for from now on." With that, Elizabeth spun around and stormed out of the suite. The traumatized violinist practically plastered himself against the wall to let her pass. Outside, a flurry of hushed whispers and sideways glances followed her through the restaurant, but she held her head high. She was done being polite and patient. She had dealt the final blow in a war she never wanted to fight, and for the first time. In a long time, she felt a sense of release, as if the weight of all her despair had been scattered across the broken dishes on the floor. The moment Elizabeth stepped onto the sidewalk, cool air hit her flushed cheeks. Samantha, who had been waiting nearby, rushed toward her. "Liz, are you okay?" she asked, arms wide to envelop her friend in a hug. Elizabeth nodded, tears now mingling with the adrenaline coursing through her. She felt spent, both physically and emotionally. Samantha guided her to the waiting car. "Let's get you somewhere safe," she murmured. "You don't need to go back to that penthouse if you don't want to." Elizabeth sank into the back seat, the weight of the evening's events crashing over her. She hadn't merely confronted Adrian, she had created a spectacle that would reverberate through social circles for weeks, possibly months. The Quinn name carried prestige, and gossip moved swiftly among the elite. She dreaded the onslaught of media headlines: millionaire husband, humiliated in high-end restaurant wife overturns table in rage. Yet, strangely, she felt no regret for exposing the truth. Even as tears stung her eyes, she recognized a liberating sense of having taken back her voice. "Where to?" the driver asked. Samantha answered on Elizabeth's behalf, instructing him to head toward the Summers bookstore in Queens. Elizabeth yearned for the uncomplicated world of her childhood, if only for a night sleeping in her old bedroom, enveloped by the comforting smell of old books and her mother's homemade soup. Meanwhile, in the private dining suite of Le Papillon d'Or, chaos ensued. Adrian, covered in spilled champagne and sauce, berated the staff for not preventing his wife's sudden intrusion. He glared at Caroline, whose designer gown was ruined, a metallic odor of wine and fear lingering around her. The staff scrambled to salvage the situation, but the hush that fell over the entire establishment confirmed that everyone had heard the commotion. Adrian snarled at Caroline, "We need to leave now." Caroline, shaken and humiliated, tried to salvage her composure. "You said your wife would never do something like this," she hissed, grabbing her purse. Adrian didn't respond. He felt the precarious balance of his social image tilting precariously. Once news spread, his carefully cultivated persona of a shrewd but respectable businessman would take a massive hit. And Elizabeth, fiery, pregnant Elizabeth, was no longer safely out of sight. Back in the car, Elizabeth clung to Samantha's hand as the city lights blurred past her window. Every muscle in her body ached from tension. She trembled, worrying about her baby, about what this stress might do. Yet she couldn't ignore the flicker of relief that accompanied her tears. She had stood up for herself in a grand, undeniable gesture. For one night, at least, she felt she had broken free from the oppressive weight of Adrian's secrets. Samantha whispered reassuring words, promising to help Elizabeth navigate the storm that would inevitably follow. In that silent, dimly lit back seat, Elizabeth felt the unborn life inside her move again, as if gently affirming her choice to fight for a reality where neither she nor her child would ever be treated as disposable. The next morning, Elizabeth awoke in her childhood bedroom to the scent of fresh coffee and blueberry muffins wafting up from the bookstore's small cafe downstairs. For a fleeting moment, she felt a semblance of normalcy, as though she were a teenager again. But reality crashed back when she checked her phone. Dozens of missed calls, voicemails, and text messages flooded her notifications. "Are you okay?" Read one message from an old college friend, followed by a link to a tabloid article, "Billionaire hotelier Adrian Quinn. Embroiled in scandal, wife overturns dinner table in jealous rage." Elizabeth's stomach turned. She sank onto the edge of her bed, scanning the article. Sensationalist reporters had already dug up every detail they could find. Quotes from onlookers painted her as a scorned woman who had lost her temper. One line read, "Sources claim Mistress Quinn is pregnant," which may have fueled the dramatic confrontation. Elizabeth felt her cheeks burn in anger and embarrassment. She despised that the public now saw her personal torment as entertainment. Downstairs, Margaret Summers waited in the bookstore cafe with a hot cup of tea and comforting arms. Elizabeth tearfully recounted the media onslaught, the incessant calls from unknown numbers, and the gnawing fear that Adrian might try to twist the narrative to protect his reputation. "You did what you had to do, honey," Margaret said, patting Elizabeth's hand. "No matter what they say, you stood up for yourself, and that's something to be proud of." Samantha chimed in, "We'll handle this together. Maybe you should talk to a lawyer and your OB-GYN to ensure you and the baby are fine after all this stress." Sure enough, Adrian's attempts to control the fallout arrived later that day. He texted Elizabeth in a string of frantic messages. "We need to talk immediately. You have to retract some of your statements. This bad press is affecting our stock prices. Think of our child's future. You're making a scene." The audacity of it all made Elizabeth's blood boil. He seemed more concerned about stocks and reputation than her emotional well-being or that of their unborn child. In a moment of resolve, she blocked his number. Let him squirm, let him deal with the tabloids and the whispers alone. She needed to protect her sanity and focus on her pregnancy. Margaret called an old family friend, attorney Jonathan Wong, who specialized in family law. Arrangements were made for a discreet meeting. Elizabeth knew the day might come when she had to legally protect herself and her baby, whether through separation, divorce, or some form of custody agreement. The thought was terrifying. She had once believed she and Adrian would remain partners for life, but illusions had dissolved the moment she discovered his infidelity. As she surveyed the cozy bookstore, her safe haven, and listened to the murmured conversations of customers flipping through novels, she felt a wave of bitter-sweet relief. The life she had cherished with Adrian might be over, but she was no longer trapped in a web of secrets. She had waged a dramatic war for her dignity, and though the media attacked her for it, she felt an unwavering sense of self-respect blooming within her. She was done playing the meek wife in the corner of a glitzy stage. Later that week, Elizabeth arrived at Jonathan Wong's law office, a modest but well-kept suite on the Upper East Side. Samantha accompanied her for emotional support, holding her hand as they ascended in the elevator. The hallway smelled faintly of lemon polish, and the walls were adorned with framed degrees and recognitions. Jonathan, a gentle-voiced man in his late 50s, welcomed them warmly. He had known the Summers family for decades, once helping them secure the lease for their bookstore amidst ruthless developers. His calm, steady demeanor instantly put Elizabeth at ease. After reviewing the situation, Jonathan leaned back in his chair, fingers tented thoughtfully. "It's clear Adrian's actions amount to marital misconduct," he said, "but the approach we take depends on what you ultimately want. Do you want a legal separation, a divorce, custody, negotiations, financial protections for your child?" Elizabeth clasped her hands in her lap. Though she'd braced for this, hearing the words aloud left her dizzy. "I need to focus on my baby," she managed softly. "I can't live in constant stress, wondering if Adrian and Caroline are still carrying on." Jonathan nodded understandingly. "If you want to pursue divorce, we'll need to consider alimony, child support, and property division. The Quinn family assets are substantial. If you'd rather attempt reconciliation, which, from the sound of things, might be difficult, we could draft a post-nuptial agreement. Either way, Adrian doesn't have unlimited power, especially once this scandal has erupted publicly." Samantha squeezed Elizabeth's hand for reassurance. "Remember, you're not alone," she whispered. Elizabeth offered a weak smile, grateful for her friend's unwavering support. She thought back to all the times she'd tried to speak to Adrian, only to be brushed aside as though her concerns were trivial. Now she had legal backing, and for the first time it felt like a tangible shield against Adrian's influence. Over the next few days, Jonathan and his team investigated Adrian's finances to ensure transparency in case of a divorce filing. They also drew up initial custody considerations, which outlined that Elizabeth, as the baby's primary caregiver, would have significant legal advantages. Every step felt like trudging through molasses, exhausting, yet necessary. In a surprising turn of events, Elizabeth received calls of support from unlikely corners of Adrian's social circle, other wives and partners who had witnessed or experienced similar betrayals within high society. One woman, Catherine Hayes, confided that her own husband had flaunted multiple affairs, but coerced her into silence with threats of financial ruin. "What you did took courage," Catherine said in a hushed phone call. "You stood up for yourself in a way many of us wish we could." This growing chorus of solidarity emboldened Elizabeth. The humiliating press coverage no longer felt like a personal failure. Instead, it became a catalyst for shaking the foundations of her marriage's toxic status quo. In the quiet evenings at her parents' place, she held a hand protectively over her growing belly, determined to forge a future defined by dignity and self-worth, rather than subjugation to Adrian's whims. One crisp morning, about 2 weeks after the explosive dinner incident, Elizabeth's phone lit up with a number she no longer had saved, Adrian Quinn. She had blocked him, but he must have used a different line. After a moment of hesitation, she answered, mentally bracing herself for more ranting. "I want to talk," Adrian said abruptly, his voice devoid of its usual confidence. Face to face, without lawyers, just us. Elizabeth's heart fluttered with conflicting emotions, anger, heartbreak, and a trace of curiosity. She finally agreed to meet him at a neutral location, a quiet cafe near the law office. Samantha insisted on waiting in a car nearby in case Elizabeth needed backup. So, on a brisk afternoon, Elizabeth found herself seated at a small corner table in Café Lumière, swirling a spoon in her chamomile tea. The cafe was mostly empty, the warm scent of baked goods drifting through the air. Adrian arrived wearing a tailored suit that only accentuated the dark circles under his eyes. He looked tired, his usual swagger subdued. He removed his coat, and they exchanged stiff greetings. The tension was palpable. Neither touched the pastries set before them. Finally, Adrian spoke. "Elizabeth, this has spiraled out of control. The media, the business, everything's in free fall." He paused, struggling to maintain composure. "I never wanted to hurt you like this. I just got carried away." And Caroline, Elizabeth raised a hand, stopping him. "I'm not here to rehash how you ended up with Caroline. I'm here because I'm pregnant with your child, and we need to figure out how that impacts our futures." Adrian swallowed hard. She could tell he was used to controlling the narrative, smoothing over issues with power and charm. Now he was facing real consequences. "Look, I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I know it doesn't fix what I did, but the negative press is tanking our hotel group's image. Investors are getting spooked. I'd like us to at least be civil for the sake of the baby and the business." Elizabeth studied him carefully. She noted the flicker in his eyes that might have been genuine remorse, but it was overshadowed by panic about his crumbling empire. Was he truly remorseful, or just desperate to salvage his public image? "Civil," Elizabeth repeated, her tone icy. "Did you give me civility when you lied about late-night meetings? When you flaunted Caroline at that restaurant? When you humiliated me and our unborn child in front of the world?" Adrian flinched. "I know, and I regret it. I do. But let's figure out a path forward. If you want a divorce, fine. I'll cooperate. But the tabloids are crucifying us. The negative press is hurting your reputation too. We should present a united front in public, at least until the scandal dies down." Elizabeth let silence stretch between them. The concept of presenting a united front rang hollow. Still, she had to consider practicalities. The scandal would follow her, whether or not she aligned with Adrian in the public eye. And she needed financial security for the baby. If temporary civility could facilitate a stable future for her child, perhaps it was worth negotiating. She leaned forward, voice low. "I'm willing to consider an arrangement, Adrian. But make no mistake, if you think this is a path to winning me back without changing, you're mistaken. I won't be your puppet wife to parade around while you chase your next thrill." Adrian nodded, lips pressed tight. He reached into his pocket and handed her a business card. "Have your attorney call mine," he said simply. "We'll work something out." Then, with a final, tentative glance at her, he slipped on his coat and left. Elizabeth exhaled a shaky breath, feeling as though she'd just navigated a battlefield. Whatever the outcome, she sensed this meeting had moved her one step closer to a resolution, painful though it might be. In the weeks following her tense meeting with Adrian, Elizabeth felt torn between the pull of the past and the promise of a different life. After multiple discussions among their lawyers, she and Adrian reached a tentative agreement, a public statement affirming they were working on their marriage and a set of legal provisions ensuring financial support for Elizabeth during her pregnancy. Both sides had their reasons. Adrian needed to placate jittery investors, while Elizabeth craved stability for her unborn child. Despite the outward show of cooperation, Elizabeth's private reality remained fraught with doubts. Could she ever truly trust a man who had so brazenly betrayed her? Did she even want to stay married to him? She found temporary solace in refurbishing her parents' bookstore. The upstairs loft had been converted into a reading lounge years ago, but Elizabeth poured new energy into it, painting the walls a soothing shade of light green, ordering comfortable chairs, and stocking the shelves with children's books for future storytime sessions, possibly even for her own child one day. One afternoon, as she stood atop a stepladder dusting shelves, Samantha rushed in. "Liz! You need to see this." She held out her phone, showing a tabloid website. Caroline Gray had given an exclusive interview, painting herself as a naive victim who had been led on by Adrian's empty promises of leaving his wife. She claimed to have broken off the affair to avoid further harm to the innocent child. The piece portrayed Adrian as a manipulative, power-obsessed cheat and Elizabeth as a tragic, unsuspecting spouse. For the first time, Caroline was publicly severing ties with Adrian and seeking sympathy. Elizabeth clicked the phone off, her emotions roiling. "So Caroline wants to salvage her image," she murmured. "She's framing herself as the wounded party." A swirl of conflicting feelings coursed through her: anger at the hypocrisy, relief that Caroline was out of the picture, and an odd sense of pity for a woman who had allowed herself to become a pawn in Adrian's world. Samantha gave Elizabeth a gentle, encouraging look. "What do you want to do with all this, Liz? Adrian's name is being dragged through the mud, and he's lost his mistress's support. Does that change anything for you?" Elizabeth stepped down from the ladder. She felt an unusual calm settle over her. Caroline's spin doesn't change the fact that Adrian lied. She's just another victim, in her own twisted way, of his narcissism. With a soft sigh, she continued, "I need to focus on my baby, Samantha. If Adrian truly changes, maybe we could find common ground in co-parenting. But I can't force him to be a different man, and I won't chain myself to him just for appearances." That evening, Elizabeth received a call from Adrian. His voice sounded hollow, the commanding luster gone. "Caroline's interview blindsided me," he admitted. "I'm sorry you had to see that." A part of Elizabeth felt vindicated, hearing him finally stripped of excuses, but she remained guarded. She offered no solace, only a measured response. "This is the reality you created, Adrian. I have to protect myself and our child now. You do what you must, but I've made my position clear." He started to speak, perhaps to plead or argue, but Elizabeth gently ended the call. Tears stung her eyes afterward, not because she regretted her words, but because the final vestiges of her storybook marriage had dissolved. However, in letting go of the fairy tale, she realized she was stepping into a future shaped by her own strength, and for once, that idea felt powerfully liberating. As Elizabeth entered her third trimester, her physical and emotional burdens increased. Daily routines became more strenuous, yet she found an odd solace in anticipating the baby's arrival. She set up a makeshift nursery in her childhood home, painting pastel murals of clouds and stars on the walls. Each night, She sang lullabies to her unborn child, promising them a life of love and stability, no matter what marital storms swirled around her. Adrian's once constant stream of texts and calls dwindled. He had retreated to damage control in his own life, trying to rebuild the Quinn Hotel Group's public image, placating stockholders and dodging paparazzi. The tabloids still occasionally flared with updated gossip, but the sensationalism was fading, replaced by newer scandals capturing the media's short attention span. In the midst of this relative calm, Jonathan Wong called Elizabeth with an important update. Adrian's lawyer wants to finalize a postnuptial agreement, he explained over the phone. It guarantees substantial financial support for you and the baby, whether you remain married or not. But it also includes provisions that, if you were to initiate a divorce now, the Quinn family might drag out litigation unless you settle on certain terms. Elizabeth weighed her options carefully. The postnuptial agreement offered stability health insurance, child support, and a trust fund for the baby. Yet, it also implicitly suggested that Adrian was preparing for a scenario where the marriage might never truly recover. She met with Adrian in Jonathan's office to discuss the final details. He looked exhausted, but somewhat contrite, as if the steady erosion of his public image had brought him back down to earth. As they sat across from each other at the conference table, Elizabeth felt a pang of sadness. Once, they had shared a grand love story filled with candle-lit confessions, spontaneous adventures, and visions of a glamorous future. Now, they were reduced to calculating numbers and conditions on legal documents. He signed the papers with a resigned sigh. "I do want to be there for the baby, Elizabeth," he murmured, not quite meeting her eyes. "I'm not sure what that looks like now, but I'm not the monster people are painting me to be." She offered him a faint nod, unsure of how to respond. She could sense the complex swirl of regret, pride, and longing in his words. Leaving the office, Elizabeth felt a mixture of relief and sorrow. The postnuptial was a safety net, one that secured her and her child's future financially. But it also underscored that the marriage she once cherished had essentially died. She realized that perhaps the best she could hope for was a civil co-parenting relationship, one where resentment wouldn't overshadow the baby's life. That night, she lay in bed, one hand on her belly. She recalled the moment she flipped the table at Le Papillon d'Or, a fiery act driven by heartbreak. Strange as it seemed, she felt grateful for that impulsive outburst. It had been the spark that freed her from Adrian's web of deceit. Now, she stood on the brink of a new life, one not defined by wealth or appearances, but by self-respect, maternal love, and a fresh start on her own terms. The final weeks of Elizabeth's pregnancy passed in a blur of medical checkups, nursery preparations, and cautious hope. She found an unexpected sense of peace in her parents' bookstore, greeting regular customers who asked about the baby's progress. Even the looming presence of paparazzi had faded, replaced by the rhythms of ordinary life. When her contractions finally started late one evening, Elizabeth felt a jolt of anticipation and fear. Margaret rushed her to the hospital, with Samantha riding shotgun. In the bright, bustling maternity ward, Elizabeth was hooked up to monitors, the steady beeping matching the pounding of her heart. As the hours dragged, pain ebbed and flowed in fierce waves, but every contraction brought her closer to meeting the little one she had fought so hard to protect. Despite the bitterness she felt toward Adrian, she called him from the hospital, giving him a chance to be present for his child's birth. He arrived in haste, looking frazzled yet determined. For a fleeting moment, Elizabeth saw the man she used to love, vulnerable, hopeful, and afraid. He stood by her side through the final stages of labor, clinging to her hand, swallowing back tears when the baby's first cries pierced the air. "It's a girl," announced Dr. Rachel Peterson, gently placing the newborn in Elizabeth's arms. Tiny fingers curled around Elizabeth's thumb, and everything else, betrayals, headlines, heartbreak, faded into the background. Adrian hovered close, tears welling in his eyes. In that profound moment, all that mattered was the precious, fragile life between them. They named her Sophia Quinn Summers, blending both surnames as a testament to her dual heritage. Though Elizabeth remained guarded, she allowed Adrian a tentative bond with their daughter, watching him cradle Sophia with a trembling smile. Perhaps fatherhood would nudge him toward humility and genuine care. Time alone would tell. In the following days, Elizabeth recuperated, her hospital room brimming with flowers, congratulatory cards, and the gentle coos of her newborn. Her parents and Samantha took shifts, ensuring she never felt isolated. Adrian visited daily, carefully respecting Elizabeth's boundaries. He seemed genuinely taken with Sophia's every breath and yawn, though Elizabeth couldn't yet decipher if this signaled long-term change or fleeting novelty. On her final day in the hospital, Elizabeth looked out the window at the city skyline. Clouds drifted lazily, reflecting the slow, steady pace of life moving forward. Holding Sophia close, she whispered, "We're going to be okay, my little one." She knew she had decisions to make, whether to officially file for divorce, attempt a fragile reconciliation, or something in between. But for now, the only certainty was that her life and the life of her child would revolve around love, authenticity, and a refusal to ever be silenced by wealth or deceit again. In the months to come, Elizabeth would discover new facets of herself, strengths born from the ashes of betrayal, capacities for forgiveness she had never known. Whether Adrian would walk beside them in the future or remain a distant figure in Sophia's life was a question no lawyer's contract could truly answer. What she did know was that she and her daughter would face the world head-on, with or without the Quinn name. And that, at last, was a future Elizabeth was ready to embrace. Thank you for joining me on this intense journey of heartbreak, betrayal, and ultimately self-discovery. Elizabeth's story reminds us that no amount of wealth or glamour can replace the honesty and respect needed to sustain a loving partnership. In standing her ground and protecting the life growing within her, she found the courage to reclaim her voice and, in doing so, offered her child a future free from deceit.
A swirl of frost-laced wind hits Daniel's face the moment he steps out of his car, black coattails flapping against the flurry of snow. The Winter Ball has been the most anticipated event of the year, a glittering palace of music, rich wines, and elite company. But for Daniel, it's another stark reminder that he's walking in alone. He steels himself, determined not to let memories of the past taint his evening. Then across the ballroom's grand foyer, he catches sight of her Eleanor, his ex-wife. She isn't alone. She's holding the hands of 4 children who each carry the exact color and shape of his own eyes. The Winter Ball took place in the heart of Manhattan at the luxurious Plaza Hotel near Central Park. Crisp December air clung to Daniel White's every breath as he made his way past doormen who greeted him with polite nods. The swirling lights of the city reflected on the fresh snowfall, granting an almost fairy tale aura to the evening. Inside, the hotel's lobby dazzled with poinsettias, golden wreaths, and artful Christmas trees. The florid notes of a string quartet wafted through the corridor, luring him toward the grand ballroom. Daniel, 37 years old, had always been considered dashing. Tall with a chiseled jaw and haunted green eyes, he moved with a confident grace that came less from ego and more from an innate sense of self. Yet tonight, an uninvited pang of loneliness gripped his heart. Attending the ball alone was never his plan. Just a year ago, he had imagined standing here with his wife Elena On his arm, both of them in elegantly tailored outfits, exchanging polite smiles with Manhattan's elite, forging connections for their philanthropic endeavors. But life had taken a brutal turn. He and Elena parted ways under painful circumstances that still felt raw. Despite the veneer of normalcy, he attempted to wear Tom Ford suit perfectly, knotted tie, polished demeanor. Daniel felt like an open wound in the midst of a glittering crowd. Every decoration, every swirl of laughter, every passing perfume reminded him of the life he had lost. He tried to distract himself by thinking of small talk about his work at Harrington and White Investments, about the latest Wall Street Journal headlines about the real estate deals the firm had lined up. He thought of the people he might meet tonight. Potential clients, old friends, distant acquaintances like Teresa Wilson from his days at Yale, and donors who might support his cherished cause, the foundation he'd created in honor of his late father to fund scholarships for underprivileged kids. The grand double doors to the ballroom stood open, revealing a dazzling space, sparkling chandeliers, marble floors, and swirling couples in formal attire. As Daniel stepped across the threshold, he felt both an unsettling excitement and a sense of dread. Somewhere in this crowd, there could be a face from the past. Elena's face, perhaps, but in the swirl of suits and gowns, he couldn't immediately see her. He exhaled slowly, reminding himself that this evening was meant to be a fresh start, or at least a test of his ability to move on. After all, Elena had carved her own path, seemingly uninterested in the shared dreams they'd once built. He clenched his fists in his pockets. "This night is for me," he thought. "I'm going to enjoy myself, come what may." Daniel's mind drifted back to the day he first met Elena. It was during a summer internship at a hedge fund in Boston, back when they were both wide-eyed graduate students. She was bold, brilliant, and carried an aura of mystery that captivated him. Elena's luscious dark hair framed her olive complexion, and her deep brown eyes flashed with ambition. She had come from a modest background in Montreux, Switzerland, and her accent, along with her fierce determination, made her stand out among the crowd of interns. Their attraction was instant, fueled by late-night strategy sessions and stolen glances at coffee breaks. By the end of the internship, they'd begun a relationship that seemed as bright and promising as their future careers. Within 2 years after they'd finished graduate school, he at Yale, she at Columbia, they married in a private ceremony officiated at a small chapel in upstate New York. His mother, Carol White, and her father, André de la Montagne, blessed the union with tears of joy. Yet as they built their careers, cracks began to form. Both were ambitious. Both wanted the best for themselves, and ironically, that drive which once unified them started to push them apart. Elena felt stifled by the conventional life Daniel seemed to desire, a suburban home, dinner parties, early nights. Meanwhile, Daniel struggled to keep up with Elena's relentless push for success and adventure. She took job opportunities in Hong Kong and Zurich, while Daniel remained in New York to care for his ailing father and to stabilize his fledgling investment firm, Harrington and White, which he co-founded with his best friend from college, James Harrington. Long, silent months apart replaced the passion they once shared. Emails and texts became the main medium of communication. The final blow came when his father passed away, and Elena didn't show up to the funeral. She was stuck in a negotiation in Shanghai, or so she claimed. Daniel never forgave her for that. The day after the funeral, he filed for divorce. The year since the divorce was granted felt like a haze of regrets and half-hearted attempts to move forward. Daniel's mother tried to console him. James Harrington tried to bury him in work, hoping he'd forget his heartbreak in corporate success. but the hurt ran deep. He wasn't just losing Elena. He was losing the idea of the family he had so desperately wanted to build, the stability he had vowed to create, a vow that was broken. Little did he know that this fateful night at the winter ball would unravel secrets that would cut deeper than he ever imagined. A month ago, Daniel had almost declined the invitation to the winter ball. The event, hosted annually by New York's philanthropic circle, was a magnet for the richest and most influential personalities. It was a chance to mingle, to raise money for various causes, and to flash power and status. Harrington and White had been a chief sponsor for the past 3 years. Daniel James Harrington had told him, "We can't skip it. Our firm's entire public relations campaign is anchored on us being present front and center. This is how we attract high-profile clients." Daniel, sitting behind his mahogany desk, stared at the invitation's gold-trimmed edges. The bold lettering read, "Winter Ball, an evening of giving and glamour." He sighed. "I just don't feel up to it, James." His partner, a tall man with sandy hair and an unrelenting optimism, placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "Look, I know you've been through a rough patch, but it's time to step out there again. If you don't, you'll never move on." Daniel had half a mind to crumple the invitation. Memories of attending this event with Eleanor the previous year, dressed in matching midnight blue ensembles, dancing under the chandelier, celebrating the expansion of their philanthropic network, still haunted him. Back then, the final stage of divorce was looming, even if they pretended all was well in front of the cameras. But James had a point. Daniel's philanthropic foundation needed exposure, and the firm needed him to show that he was still the confident leader they all relied on. Perhaps the winter ball could mark a turning point, a chance to re-enter society with his head held high. After all, what were the odds Elena would be there? She'd been traveling the world, seemingly unconcerned with the philanthropic circuit in New York. Reluctantly, he wrote out his acceptance, sealed the envelope, and sent it back. The next day, he forwarded his measurements to his tailor for a new suit, an outward sign that he intended to move forward, even if his heart still lagged behind. The clink of champagne glasses and the resonant echoes of string instruments filled the grand ballroom. Women in sweeping satin gowns floated on the arms of men in crisp tuxedos. A faint scent of pine from the holiday decorations mixed with the sweet aroma of desserts placed at the buffet table. Daniel tried to relax by the refreshment station, swirling a glass of sparkling water. He was never one for too much alcohol, especially not when he needed to keep his wits about him. Around him, clusters of socialites murmured gossip and speculation. Teresa Wilson, a college acquaintance now working for the New York Times, offered him a polite nod from across the room. He returned the gesture, but avoided prolonged eye contact, not in the mood for an in-depth conversation. His eyes scanned the dancing couples, the swirl of color and elegance. Usually he'd find it all mesmerizing. The soft glow of chandeliers overhead, the confident laugh of donors proud to share their wealth, the swirl of philanthropic ambition that actually did some good in the world. But tonight, an uneasy tension weighed on him. Something about the air felt thick, as though the energy in the room was brimming with revelations waiting to be spilled. He stepped away from the crowd, weaving through elegantly dressed men and women. A group of corporate bankers from Goldman Sachs tried to engage him in talk about the stock market's recent fluctuations. Another small cluster from a tech startup pitched their new app. He feigned interest, made a few polite remarks, but found himself inching toward the corner of the room where a sense of quiet serenity reigned, just as he took a seat at a small table beside a pillar draped in silver garlands. His gaze drifted over the dance floor and froze. The murmuring crowd seemed to blur. The music dulled, as if his senses had zeroed in on a single figure. There, standing at the top of the ballroom's ornate staircase, was Elena. She wore a wine-red gown that accentuated her lithe form, her dark hair cascading in loose waves over her shoulders. A hush seemed to envelop him, like a wind had swept through his chest. After all these months, it still felt unreal to see her in person. It wasn't just Elena's presence that paralyzed him. At her sides stood 4 small figures. Children. 2 girls and 2 boys, each no older than 5 or 6. And in the gleam of the chandelier's light, Daniel noticed the most striking detail. Each child's eyes were the same luminous green as his own. His mind reeled. This had to be some sort of trick of the light. It couldn't be. But as Elena stepped forward, guiding them gently down the staircase, the resemblance became even clearer. 4 children with the same color and shape of eyes as Daniel White. A jolt of disbelief electrified his veins. He'd never heard Elena mention children after they split. He hadn't heard a whisper from mutual acquaintances. And now, out of nowhere, these 4 kids appeared, each bearing his most distinctive feature. The glass in his hand trembled. The lively chatter of the ball receded to a low hum. All he could do was watch, transfixed, as Elena and those children moved further into the throng of people, heading unerringly in his direction. Daniel rose slowly, heart pounding. If Elena saw him, she gave no outward sign. She turned to exchange pleasantries with a member of the philanthropic committee, her polite smile carefully in place. The children clung to her hands, one of the little girls glancing shyly around the room. Up close, the resemblance was even more impossible to deny. Each child had inherited the green eyes that were so distinctive in Daniel's family. Each had some subtle aspect of his facial structure, a dimple on the cheek, the angular tilt of the jaw, the gentle curve of the nose. He approached his steps, halting uncertain how to break the barrier of polite society that kept them separated. A swirl of dancers momentarily blocked his path. By the time he emerged into an opening, Eleanor was there, mere feet away, her expression unreadable. "Hello, Daniel," she said quietly. Even amidst the swirl of music and conversation, her voice carried to him, as though they were the only 2 people in the room. Her accent seemed a touch more pronounced than usual, or perhaps he was just hyper-aware of every detail in this moment. He swallowed, noticing the children shift uncomfortably behind her. "Elena," he managed, forcing out the word. Another breath. "I didn't know you'd be here." Her eyes flickered. The invitation came through an old contact. And, well, I wanted to support the cause. Also, I thought it might be time. Time, he repeated. He let the word linger, casting a glance at the children, who were now standing awkwardly, clearly unsure of what was happening between the grown-ups. Time for what? She hesitated, and her gaze fell to the floor. Then, drawing in a soft breath, she said, "Time for you to meet someone." Turning, she placed a gentle hand on each child's shoulder. "Mon chéri," she whispered to the boy on her right. "This is Daniel. He's an old friend of mine." Daniel's heart twisted. Just an old friend. The boy looked up, wide-eyed, and offered a polite greeting. The rest followed suit, each voice small but distinct. 2 girls, 2 boys all in a line. His mind whirled. He couldn't form the words to ask the burning question, the question that screamed for an answer. Instead, he forced a cordial smile. "How do you do?" "We're fine," replied the eldest boy, whose hair was chestnut, just like Daniel's was as a child. "My name's Sebastian." The others introduced themselves, Madeline, Florence, and Thomas. The mention of their names hammered in the reality of their existence. Daniel extended his hand tentatively, and each child shook it with a curious, polite manner that seemed unusual for their ages. At last he turned to Elena with an expression that must have pleaded for some kind of explanation. She read it clearly. "Daniel," she said in a low tone, "I didn't plan on bringing them here to shock you. But I thought maybe this was the right time to tell you the truth." A tumult of anger, confusion, and heartbreak welled up in him. He glanced around, mindful of the many guests who might be watching. "Perhaps we should talk somewhere private." She nodded. "Yes, let's go to the side lounge. The children can stay with my nanny for a moment." She turned and beckoned a woman standing discreetly by the door, who hurried over and led the children away. A dull roar filled Daniel's ears as he and Elena glided along the perimeter of the ballroom. Guests parted to let them pass, and in their curious eyes, Daniel caught glimmers of speculation. Once they reached the smaller adjacent lounge, an ornate room with plush armchairs and soft lighting, they stepped inside and shut the door. The silence in the lounge was suffocating. Elena stood by a fireplace, golden light flickering against her dress. Daniel remained near the door, as though unsure whether to enter fully or bolt. Finally, she motioned him closer. His voice, when it emerged, trembled with barely contained emotion. Are they mine?" Elena studied him, eyes glistening. "Yes," she said, softly. "They are your children." The words struck Daniel like a physical blow. He staggered backward, pressing a hand against the door for support. For a moment it felt as though the world had inverted. The walls closed in his breath, caught in his chest. He tried to reconcile the reality of what he'd just heard with the life he'd been living alone, believing fatherhood was a dream that died when his marriage ended. How? Why? He struggled for coherent words. A dozen questions fought for priority in his mind. Why wouldn't you tell me? Why 4 children? Elena. Tears welled in her eyes, and she clasped her hands together, the diamond bracelet on her wrist glinting in the firelight. It's complicated, Daniel. I was pregnant when the divorce became final. I discovered I was carrying twins at first. But there was more to it. It was a complicated pregnancy that I had to keep under the care of a specialized clinic in Geneva. She paused, swallowing hard. I couldn't bring myself to tell you. We were both so angry, so hurt. And after the funeral of your father, I felt like there was no place for me in your life. No place for my burdens. Burdens, he snapped, voice rising. They're children, Eleanor. Our children. You denied me the chance to be a father. She flinched. I know. I was selfish. I was scared. My father convinced me it might be better this way. He wanted me back in Switzerland, away from the complexities of our relationship. A pounding ache built behind Daniel's eyes, half fury, half heartbreak. He remembered Elena's father, André de la Montagne, proud, aristocratic, always disapproving of Daniel's American roots. But 4 of them. Elena, how old are they? She let out a trembling sigh. Sebastian and Madeline are 6. Florence and Thomas are 5. Yes, I was already pregnant once before the divorce process, and it was a complicated timeline. I found out I was expecting Florence and Thomas much later. The pregnancies were nearly back-to-back. I kept it hidden under the chaos of traveling, and I found ways to manage without letting you know. Daniel closed his eyes. Waves of disbelief washing over him. For all this time, you never once sent me a clue. never told me you'd had them." Tears slipped down Eleanor's cheeks. I wanted to multiple times, but each time I gathered the courage, something stopped me. Your mother's health issues, the business expansions, and your anger. We left things so bitterly. I thought I could protect the children by keeping them away from a toxic environment. She shook her head. "I see now. That was a mistake. Mistake." He barked a humorless laugh. "It's so much more than that. Elena, you've robbed me of 6 years of fatherhood. I could have known them, raised them." She lowered her head. "I'll never be able to make that up to you or to them, but I can try to fix it now if you'll let me." Daniel sank into an armchair, his limbs numb. This revelation turned his world inside out. For so long he'd thought fatherhood was an unreachable horizon, especially after the divorce. Now he had children, 4 living, breathing children who bore his eyes, his features, his lineage. He wanted to hate Eleanor, to rage at her for this injustice. But a quiet voice in his heart reminded him of how he'd once loved her, how complicated their parting had been. "You should have told me," he whispered, pressing his palms to his eyes. "I would have been there, no matter what was going on between us. That's a choice you made for both of us, and it wasn't yours to make alone." Elena knelt before him, voice quivering. "I know. I'm sorry, Daniel. Please let's talk about how to move forward for the children's sake, if nothing else." He looked at her, seeing the raw fear and regret. In the space of a single evening, everything had changed, and he had no idea how to proceed in a way that would heal 6 years of damage. Overcome by the shock of Eleanor's confession, Daniel found his mind spiraling back in time. He remembered the bitter arguments that had led to their divorce, how his father's terminal illness put pressure on him to stay in New York, how Eliana, with her unstoppable career drive, had accepted an offer in Shanghai, simultaneously bristling at Daniel's pleas for her to return. He recalled the day he discovered the plane tickets she'd booked not just for business, but for a possible permanent move overseas. The day he confronted her, they both said things they could never take back. "You'll never be satisfied with who I am," he'd accused. "You don't want a partner, you want a trophy wife." She retorted, eyes blazing. They parted ways, each convinced the other was irredeemable, and in the swirl of attorneys and court proceedings, each attempted to carve out a future free from the other's disappointment. When the divorce finalized, Daniel had felt strangely numb, as if a piece of him had died. He sought solace in building Harrington and White into a powerhouse, throwing himself into philanthropic work, perhaps to fill the void left by the breakdown of his personal life. Now discovering Elena had been pregnant at the time, or just shortly thereafter, turned all his assumptions into lies. He remembered every phone call they missed, every email they'd let go unanswered. They had been so consumed by pride that neither had paused to consider the bigger picture, that there might be unborn children deserving of unity and love. In the quiet lounge, Elena was still kneeling by his chair, eyes rimmed with tears. The faint sound of the Winter Ball's orchestra drifted in from beyond the door, an incongruous soundtrack to their shattering revelation. He said softly, "I need to know everything, Elena. No more secrets?" She nodded, standing and moving to the window where she looked out over the city lights. "I found out I was pregnant with Sebastian and Madeline about 4 months before we filed for divorce. But we were in the midst of the biggest fight of our lives. I was traveling for work. I felt alone, and my father persuaded me to stay quiet until I could come home to Switzerland. He never liked you, Daniel, and he wanted me to raise the children by myself. She turned to him, voice trembling. But then I realized I was expecting again Florence and Thomas shortly after the birth of the twins. The pregnancies were a medical miracle and complication. The doctors told me the second was an unusual overlapping pregnancy, extremely rare. I was terrified. I didn't know if I'd survive. There were complications. I was hospitalized for months in Geneva. During that time, my father kept everything hidden from the outside world. I was too weak to fight him. Daniel listened, each word burning into his soul. He envisioned Elena alone in a Swiss clinic battling a perilous pregnancy, while he, thousands of miles away, cursed her name for not being present in his life. A complicated swirl of sorrow, pity, and anger gripped him. And after the births, you just never thought it important enough to pick up the phone. Her eyes flashed with regret. I was scared. I was told you'd moved on, that you resented me. And in truth, I was ashamed for deceiving you. Yes, I let pride and fear dictate my actions. I thought maybe if I raised them alone, I could avoid all that heartbreak, all that anger. But it's been a burden on my conscience, especially as the children have grown and started asking questions about their father. Daniel closed his eyes, taking a moment to let her words settle. He pictured 4 children in a Swiss estate, asking, "Where's Daddy?" and receiving no real answers. The heartbreak coiled tighter in his chest. With trembling conviction, he rose to his feet. I have to meet them properly. They need to know who I am. Elena moved to open the door. Of course. They're just next door with the nanny. Let's go. Stepping into the side corridor, Daniel felt the warm overhead lights shining down on him with an almost glaring intensity. The sweet, festive music in the background felt surreal. He was about to meet his children for the first time in the midst of a glittering winter ball. In a small antechamber, the 4 children sat in a circle with their nanny, a petite woman named Dominique, who was reading them a story to keep them occupied. As soon as Elena and Daniel entered, the children looked up, their wide green eyes fixed on Daniel. Madeline, the older girl, peered at him with curiosity. "You look like me," she said quietly, as if discovering something extraordinary. Daniel knelt, feeling tears prick at his eyes. "I guess we do look alike," he replied. Sebastian, the older boy, placed his hands on his hips with a surprising note of confidence. "Maman says you're very important in New York. Are you a prince or something?" Daniel couldn't help a small smile. "No, I'm not a prince. I just help run a company. And I do some work helping others." Florence, a shy girl, nestled closer to her nanny. "Are you a good man?" she asked, her voice small. The question speared Daniel's heart. He glanced at Elena, who was silently watching, tears shimmering on her lashes. Carefully he answered, "I try to be. I'm not always perfect, but I do my best." Thomas, the youngest, touched Daniel's tie. "I like your tie," he said, smiling. Elena knelt beside Daniel, resting a hand on Thomas's shoulder. "Kids, I want you to know that Daniel is someone very important to me, and to you." She paused, her gaze flickering to Daniel. "He's your father." The words settled over the room. There was no thunderous reaction, no immediate meltdown, but rather a kind of hushed awe. Madeline was the first to speak again. "That means you love us." Daniel swallowed the lump in his throat. "More than I can say. Even though we're just meeting, I already feel that you're the most precious gift I could have." Sebastian studied Daniel with a pensive look. "Then why didn't you come see us before?" A flash of guilt twisted inside Daniel, though the fault wasn't truly his. But how could he explain that? He glanced at Elena, who placed a gentle hand on Sebastian's shoulder. "That's my fault," she said. "I didn't tell him where we were. Sometimes adults make mistakes." Her admission left the children quiet. They seemed to accept it with a resilience that only children possess. Slowly, Thomas reached up and touched Daniel's hair, as if to confirm he was real. Daniel felt his heart break and mend all at once. He opened his arms hesitantly, offering an embrace. One by one, the children stepped forward. Madeline first, then Sebastian, then the others. Their small arms wrapped around him, and for a moment he closed his eyes, letting the warmth of their presence wash over him. He didn't notice the tall figure standing in the corridor until someone cleared his throat. Daniel looked up to see James Harrington, his business partner and longtime friend, wearing an expression of utter shock. Daniel James said, struggling for composure, I've been looking for you, but I see you're preoccupied." His eyes roved over the 4 children. "Are these?" Daniel nodded, still holding on to the children. "Yes." "Mine." James stood there, mouth slightly open. But he rallied quickly, offering a small, congratulatory nod. "I see. Well, I'll leave you to your reunion." He turned to go, then paused, giving Daniel a pointed look that seemed to say, "We need to talk." Daniel knew with a sinking feeling that his entire life, personal and professional, had just undergone a seismic shift. Everything from finances to living arrangements to his carefully curated public image would change once it became public knowledge that he had 4 children he'd never mentioned. And in his mind, he couldn't help wondering if more secrets were lurking behind Elena's sudden reappearance. Later that evening, after ensuring the children were settled in a quiet corner, with Dominique, Danielle, and Elena slipped away to find more privacy. They went up a short flight of stairs, ending up on a balcony overlooking the ballroom floor. Below them, the party continued in full swing, glittering gowns, twinkling lights, the hum of polite conversation. He stared down at the swirling crowd, then turned to Elena. "This is a lot to take in, Elena. Are you certain no uncertainties about their paternity?" She flinched at the question. "They're yours, Daniel. I swear it on everything I hold dear." His face softened. "I want to believe you. But you have to understand my perspective. You hid them from me for 6 years. Her cheeks turned pink. "I understand. If you want a paternity test, I won't stop you. Anything to give you peace of mind." He nodded, feeling a pang of guilt for doubting her. "I'm sorry. It's just, this is so unexpected." She waved off the apology with a trembling hand. "I deserve your suspicion, but I have no reason to lie now. My father, he urged me to cut you out of our lives entirely. He was never going to let you know about them. But they kept asking. They wanted to know why they didn't have a daddy like other children. And as they grew older, their resemblance to you grew more obvious." A wave of anger coursed through Daniel. "Your father, he's the one who convinced you to hide them from me." She shook her head. "I let him. I was emotionally weak, recovering from the pregnancies far from home. I can't blame him entirely." The mention of André de la Montagne sparked an old resentment in Daniel. Elena's father had never hidden his contempt for Daniel's lack of noble pedigree and the American approach to business. But to manipulate a situation this profoundly was beyond cruel. "You realize this is going to change everything," Daniel said. "I need to speak to a lawyer, figure out custody financial arrangements. And the children, how do we help them adjust?" Elena's face showed weariness, but also relief that Daniel was taking responsibility instead of pushing them away. I've already spoken to a lawyer about my return to the States. I'm prepared to stay in New York if that's what it takes. He eyed her wary. And your job? She sighed. I stepped back from my international projects. Right now, I'm focusing on philanthropic work. My father doesn't approve, but that doesn't matter anymore. My priority is the children. Daniel let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He recalled how they once dreamed of having children, raising them in a home full of love and mutual respect. That dream had crumbled. Now faced with reality, they had to figure out how to pick up the pieces and build something stable for 4 innocent lives. How do we start? He asked softly. Elena's lips curved into a sad smile. Perhaps by letting them know we both love them, that we're both here for them. Everything else can come later. For tonight, let's just be there for them. As the evening wore on, Daniel felt guilt creeping in. The 4 children, his children, were clearly bewildered by this sudden introduction. While they bravely tried to interact with Daniel, he sensed their uncertainty. After all, in their young minds, he was a stranger who happened to share their eyes, face shape, and last name. He tried to be jovial with them, kneeling to their level, listening to their half-formed stories about Switzerland, about their school, about the snow-capped mountains they missed. But inside, he was consumed by a swirl of emotions. He'd missed their first steps, first words, birthdays, 6 years of precious moments. And then came another jolt. During a lull, Madeline quietly asked, "Is Hans coming too?" Daniel glanced at Elena. Confusion etched on his face. Elena's expression stiffened. "We'll talk about that later, sweetheart," she said hastily. Hands Daniel pressed. Elena hesitated, then cleared her throat. I've been seeing someone, a colleague from work. It's not serious, but the children know him. He was around as a friend. A sharp pang of jealousy, anger, and betrayal shot through Daniel. That was only natural. Eleanor was no longer his wife, and she had every right to date. But the thought that another man had been a figure in his children's lives, even if just tangentially, set his teeth on edge. He fought to keep his voice calm. "So he's been around the children," Elena nodded, looking away. "They like him, Daniel. He's been kind to them." Daniel swallowed the bitterness rising in his throat. "I see," Sebastian piped up. "Hans takes us sledding. He helped me make a birdhouse once. The image of another man, stepping into fatherly roles, stung Daniel deeply. Yet he forced a polite nod. "That's nice of him." Elena quickly changed the subject, offering the children a plate of mini pastries from a passing waiter. But Daniel's thoughts lingered on Hans. He wondered if Hans had become a paternal figure, if the children would look to him instead of Daniel. By the time the ball was winding down, Daniel had endured the well-meaning small talk of acquaintances who admired the adorable children, asking whose they were. He offered vague smiles and quick answers, uncertain how to handle such personal inquiries. Outside, the snowfall had intensified, blanketing the city in white. Daniel stood with the children under the glowing street lamps, waiting as a valet brought around 2 cars. He felt an unspoken tension with Elena by his side. They were 2 estranged individuals, forced back together by the existence of these 4 precious lives. "Where are you staying tonight?" he asked her. "At the Ritz, for now," she replied. "I didn't know how you'd react, so I didn't make longer-term arrangements." He nodded. "That's fine. Look, tomorrow I'd like to spend more time with them. Can we arrange that?" Elena studied him. relief softening her features. Of course, they need to know their father. Daniel forced a tiny smile at the word father, still grappling with the weight of it. Then, as the children climbed into the waiting SUV, Daniel laid a gentle hand on Elena's arm. "Thank you for telling me, even if it's late." She gave him a somber nod. "And I'm sorry." In the hush of the swirling snow, Daniel watched as the vehicle pulled away. He stood there a long time, staring into the winter night, silently vowing that whatever happened next, he wouldn't abandon those children. No matter how painful the transition, they were his, and he was theirs. The following morning, Daniel woke in his penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park. Sleep had eluded him for much of the night visions of 4 bright-eyed faces populating his restless dreams. He rose early, brewing a pot of strong coffee as he mulled over the next step. He called his mother Carol White, who lived in a quiet suburb in Connecticut. It was time she heard the news. When he told her she had 4 grandchildren, the coffee mug almost slipped from his hand as he heard her reaction. First she stammered in disbelief, then sobbed, then erupted in joy mingled with confusion and a tinge of anger at Eleanor's secrecy. Despite everything, Carol couldn't wait to meet them. Daniel also placed a call to James Harrington, who demanded an explanation. They arranged to meet in the Harrington and White boardroom that afternoon, once Daniel had a chance to visit with his newly discovered family. A text beeped on Daniel's phone just as he stepped into the hallway. "Elena, we're at the Central Park Zoo with the kids. Meet us here if you can." Daniel hurried to dress, donning a casual sweater and coat. The crisp winter air bit at his cheeks as he strode down the block, weaving past holiday shoppers and carriage horses. The sense of surreal anticipation made his heart pound. At the zoo's entrance, he found Elena and the children watching seals swim in a large tank. The children spotted him first, waving excitedly. His chest warmed at their enthusiasm. He approached with a smile. "Hey guys," Sebastian grabbed his hand. "Look at the seals, Papa." The casual use of Papa startled Daniel, but he squeezed the boy's hand in response, a lump forming in his throat. Elena noticed his reaction. "They adapt quickly," she murmured, eyes bright with unshed tears. They strolled along, admiring the polar bears and penguins, occasionally stopping to buy hot cocoa. Daniel tried to soak in every detail, how Madeline tugged on his sleeve to show him her favorite animals. How Thomas giggled when the penguins waddled, how Florence shyly stuck close to Elena, how Sebastian asked a million questions about everything. They were a family moving in a loose cluster, forging a tender sense of unity. Yet Daniel couldn't help noticing a shadow in Elena's gaze, as if she were keeping another secret. After a while, Sebastian raced ahead. "Papa, there's an ice sculpture over there." Elena and Daniel lagged behind, exchanging a look. "They're incredible," Daniel remarked. "Smart, curious. I'm amazed at how they each have their own personality." Elena smiled. "You would have made a wonderful father, Daniel." He regarded her intently. "Is there anything else you haven't told me? Because right now I need the truth. Everything." She sighed, glancing away. "There is something else, but I wasn't sure how to bring it up. It's about Thomas. He's had some health issues since he was born prematurely." Alarm raced through Daniel. "Health issues? Is he okay?" "He's mostly fine," Elena said quickly. "But he has a minor heart condition. The doctors say it's manageable with medication and monitoring. He might need surgery in the future, but there's a good chance he won't." Daniel's face paled. "My God, Elena, you should have told me. I'd have been there for him." She placed a hand on his arm. I know. This is what I regret most. I'm ready to set things right now. I've brought them here so we can live in New York for a while, see specialists if needed, and ensure he gets the best care. I'll bear any cost if you want. Daniel's response was immediate. No. We'll share it. He's my son, our son. I'll do whatever it takes to help him. Emotions swarmed in Eleanor's eyes, relief mingled with sorrow. Thank you. Their conversation was cut short by the children's excited calls. They hurried over, trying to smile and laugh as if everything was normal. But for Daniel, each moment with the children was a reminder of what he'd missed and of the challenges to come. After the zoo, they decided to warm up at a nearby cafe, a cozy establishment known for its artisan pastries. The children devoured mini croissants while Elena sipped a cappuccino, and Daniel hovered protectively, noticing every detail about his new family members. Between bites of pastry, Florence hesitantly asked Papa, "Do you have a nice house?" Daniel chuckled softly. "I have an apartment. It's big enough for all of you if you ever want to visit." Madeline's face lit up. "Can we see it?" Eleanor shot Daniel a questioning glance. "Are you sure you're ready for that?" He took a moment before nodding. "Yes. I'd like them to see where I live. I have a spare room that can be turned into something for them." So it was decided. They gathered their things and took a quick taxi ride to Daniel's penthouse overlooking Central Park. The building's doorman, Mr. Bartholomew, nearly dropped his cap upon seeing Daniel leading 4 children by the hand. "Elena. Kids?" "This is home," Daniel said, opening his front door. The foyer was sleek and modern, perhaps too sterile for children's tastes. Sebastian's eyes widened at the floor-to-ceiling windows, while Madeline squealed with delight at the view of the snowy treetops and distant skyscrapers. They spread out, exploring. Elena followed them, pointing out paintings and artifacts Daniel had collected. Her gaze stopped on a photo of Daniel's parents. "Your mother will be ecstatic," she said. "She's already invited all of you to spend Christmas in Connecticut," Daniel replied. A flicker of fear touched Elena's face. "It might be overwhelming to meet your entire family so soon." He shrugged gently. "They're the children's family too, Elena. We can take it slow. I just want them to feel welcomed." She nodded, watching Thomas run giggling across the living room's polished floor. They deserve a big family Christmas. They've never really had that. A warm feeling grew in Daniel's chest. Maybe despite the heartbreak, they could form a family dynamic, if not as husband and wife, then at least as coring co-parents. Suddenly, Eleanor's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, her face paling. She excused herself, stepping into the hallway. Daniel lingered, an uneasy feeling creeping over him. A few minutes later, Elena returned, face ashen. "What's wrong?" he asked. "It's Hans," she said, voice tight. "He's in New York. He wants to see me and the children." Daniel felt a sudden wave of protectiveness, almost territorial. "He has no claim on them. I'm their father." Eleanor placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's not that simple. The kids know him. They care for him." "But I'm here now," Daniel insisted, trying to quell the anger. "I won't just stand by while some stranger plays father." She looked torn. "I understand. I'll talk to him. Just please don't make this more complicated than it has to be." Daniel exhaled, controlling his temper. "Fine. But I want to be present for any meeting. The children need stability, not confusion." Elena nodded, and the tension in her shoulders seemed to ease. But the mere prospect of Hans stepping into the picture threatened to upend the fragile dynamic Daniel and Elena were beginning to forge. Over the next few days, Daniel spent every spare moment with his children. He took them to the Museum of Natural History, where they marveled at dinosaur skeletons and celestial exhibits. He showed them Rockefeller Center's towering Christmas tree, letting them watch the ice skaters gliding beneath twinkling lights. Those days were some of the happiest Daniel had experienced in a long time, yet a lingering worry about Hans hovered in the back of his mind. Would Hans try to disrupt his reconnection with the children? One afternoon, while Elena and the children were napping in their suite at the Ritz, Daniel went to his office to meet James Harrington. Sitting in the sleek boardroom with glass walls overlooking Manhattan, Daniel braced for James's barrage of questions, so James began leaning forward. 4 kids. Daniel, you have no idea the shockwaves this is causing among our investors and clients. They're all calling me asking if there's some scandal or if we've been hiding something. Daniel pinched the bridge of his nose. I didn't know, James. Believe me, this was as much a surprise to me as it was to the world. James studied him intently. Do you believe Elena's story? Daniel nodded slowly. Yes. She's done a DNA test already. Or at least she's offered it. I believe her. They have my eyes, for God's sake. James exhaled. All right. So how are we handling this from a PR standpoint? Daniel thought for a moment. We release a brief statement saying I've recently become aware of my children that I intend to fulfill all my responsibilities as a father, and that the details remain private. That should suffice. I don't want to exploit my kids' private lives. James agreed. But be aware the media might spin it. Elena was high profile in the finance world too. They'll probably dig up old dirt. Daniel nodded, crossing his arms. Let them dig. I just care about the kids right now. They're my top priority. James softened, offering Daniel a supportive smile. You've always wanted a family, man. Maybe this is your chance. Just be careful with Elena. She's unpredictable. Daniel gave a mirthless chuckle. Trust me, I know. After the meeting, Daniel returned to the Ritz, a sense of determination fueling him. He wanted to talk to Elena about officially moving back to the US with the children. But when he arrived, he found her in tears in the lounge. She looked up, eyes puffy. Hans. He confronted me. He demanded to see the children. He's threatening legal action, claiming he's acted as a de facto parent. Daniel's blood ran cold. He has no legal claim. He's not their father. Elena sniffed, wiping her cheeks. He's not listed on any birth certificates, of course, but he's threatening to tell the tabloids about everything about how I hid the children from you, about the details of our finances. He wants money, Daniel. Daniel ground his teeth. So he's blackmailing you. She nodded miserably. I broke things off with him as soon as I decided to come to New York. He didn't take it well. Now he's furious. Rage coursed through Daniel, but he forced himself to remain calm. We'll handle it. I'll talk to my lawyers, and we'll put a stop to his threats. The children won't be used as pawns. Eleanor looked at him with gratitude. I'm sorry, Daniel. It seems every time you try to fix things, I bring another complication. He gently took her hand. We'll get through it. Together. For the kids. That evening, an unexpected phone call shattered the fragile calm. Hans called Daniel directly. His tone was aggressive, laced with bitterness. You think you can just waltz back into Elena's life and claim those children, Hans spat. I've been the one helping them for years. Daniel clenched his jaw. They're my children, Hans. My blood. Hans laughed harshly. Your blood, sure. But I was there when Eleanor needed help. If you had any decency, you'd let me at least see them." Daniel paused, wrestling with the primal urge to tell Hans to stay away forever. But he also recognized that the children knew Hans. Forcing them to lose him abruptly might be traumatic. "We can discuss a supervised meeting," Daniel conceded. "But if you try anything, any attempt at blackmail, I'll see you in court." Hans scoffed. "You think your money and power can scare me?" Elena's father tried that. He didn't succeed. Daniel ended the call, fury boiling in his veins. Elena, who stood nearby, watched him with anxious eyes. "We'll do a supervised meeting," he told her. "It might help the children's transition if they can say goodbye or set boundaries. But he's not going to threaten us anymore." She nodded, tears of relief shining. "Thank you for handling this." They set the meeting for the next day in the presence of lawyers at a neutral law office. The children arrived with Elena subdued and confused. Hans was already there, face pinched with anger. When the children ran to greet him, Daniel's stomach twisted. Hans cast a smug glance Daniel's way, as if to say, "See, they're mine in spirit." But Sebastian, after hugging Hans briefly, hurried to Daniel's side. "Papa, are you okay?" Daniel's heart soared at the simple question the child's concern for him. "I'm fine, buddy," he murmured, tousling Sebastian's hair. The negotiations that followed were tense. Hans wanted continued contact, threatening to leak scandalous information. Eleanor confessed that Hans had personal emails and financial records that could be damaging if taken out of context. Daniel's lawyer threatened Hans with a defamation suit if he went public. Finally, they reached a precarious agreement. Hans would receive a severance of sorts, a lump sum from Elena's personal funds, and would agree to no future contact with the children unless they requested it themselves once they were of age. It wasn't an ideal solution, but it would stave off immediate scandal and harassment. The children seemed unsettled as Hans gave them a final hug. Thomas clung to him for a moment, tears glistening in his eyes. Daniel's chest tightened at the sight, but he tried to remain stoic. Hans left abruptly, slamming the door behind him. Outside the office, Eleanor knelt to comfort the children, tears streaming down her cheeks. Daniel joined them, feeling the weight of these events pressing down on their small shoulders. In that moment, he promised himself he would never let them feel abandoned again. In the weeks that followed, life settled into a new rhythm. Elena and the children moved into a rented townhouse near Daniel's apartment. Daniel spent his weekends showing them American traditions, like decorating a Christmas tree, baking cookies, and practicing English holiday carols. The day finally came for the children to meet Carol White, their grandmother in Connecticut. Despite the tension and swirling emotions, the meeting was a joyous occasion. Carol wept openly as she embraced each of her grandchildren, scolding Elena only briefly for keeping them hidden for so long. Christmas morning found them all gathered in Carol's cozy living room. Snow fell softly outside. The children squealed over presents, and Elena found herself welcomed warmly, surprisingly so, by Carol's motherly grace. Daniel, dressed in a comfy sweater, took time to reflect on how drastically his life had changed in mere weeks. He now had the family he had once dreamed about, though not in the way he'd imagined. Eleanor and Daniel still had much to resolve. Their romantic relationship remained uncertain. Old wounds and betrayals lingered, but so did a lingering thread of love. They'd begun counseling, determined to co-parent effectively. Whether or not they would reconcile as a couple remained to be seen. One late night after the children had gone to bed, Daniel and Elena sat on his penthouse balcony. The city lights twinkled below the hush of snow, making the moment feel magical. Elena leaned her head on Daniel's shoulder. "Do you think we could ever be a family again?" she asked. Daniel slipped an arm around her, 1,000 thoughts flooding his mind. "I think we already are a family," he said softly. "Maybe not the conventional kind, but we'll figure it out." Elena gazed at him, a small smile curving her lips. "Thank you," she whispered, "for giving us another chance." He closed his eyes, inhaling the crisp winter air. "Thank you for letting me be a father." They sat there for a long while, listening to the distant hum of the city, their hearts brimming with the complicated, fragile hope of a new beginning. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey of heartbreak, hidden children, and the fragile hope of new beginnings. Daniel's story reminds us that even through betrayal and pain, love and forgiveness can lead to unexpected miracles.